Welcome back to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and I sure missed you guys from last week. I'm glad that you're joining us again here. I love doing these shows every Tuesday and Wednesday because the longer we do these shows, the better and better quality of guests we get for you. Not that we've really had any bad guests, I wouldn't say that at all, but you know, the more we do this show, the more people see it, the more they support it, and the more they want to come on and sit down and have a conversation with us, right? So I'm very happy to have that. Folks, we've got some great events coming up for Cannabis Lab. I'm actually putting together a panel at the end of this month on the 25th. It is going to be about the companies that are expanding into the Florida market and the importance of Florida in the overall cannabis landscape. Very excited about that panel. So that will be on March 25th. We also have an in-person event coming up. I want to say it is on the 18th, and Rob's going to kill me again. I've got to look and confirm that. I'll do that before the end of the show, but we get you that information. Of course, because I can't remember anything, you can always go to joinclab.com to find out everything you need to know when all our events are. Become a member of C-Lab. Also, folks, if you missed any of our episodes, we had a great episode with Tim Schuler last week of the Detroit Fudge Company and Cannalicious out of Michigan. I'm a fan of the Michigan market. I'm excited what a lot of brands are doing there. You can check that out at youtube.com/elevateyourgrind. All of our shows will be there. Please, if you like the show, please go subscribe. We are trying to increase the audience for this show. We are trying to make sure that we can continue to bring this to you and expand the show, get great guests, start doing some more interactive stuff. And that all starts with your little like and subscription right there. So with that being said, I told you I was going to start in these intros. Clearly, I've lied to you, but I'm very excited for today's guest because how do I stay vague about this? I mean, obviously I announced who it was before this, but I found this person through his brother, like I would say many of us did. But when I actually digged into his past and everything else, it was amazing. The things that he had accomplished, just the journey itself, right? When we look at the stereotypes and the stigma around cannabis, if you looked at this gentleman's past on paper, you wouldn't imagine that he has the resume that he has today, because society tells us that that doesn't happen, right? He should be lazy. He shouldn't have a job. There are a lot of things about him. But I'm very happy with today's guest because I think he, like his brother, a great blend of the cannabis enthusiast, cannabis activist, cannabis professional, and the corporate world. And I think that is part of his journey to help bridge that gap. So if you haven't figured it out by now, please welcome my guest today, one of the co-founders of Harborside, one of the co-founders of the Last Prisoner Project. I can probably spend another 5 minutes going through all of his titles. Please welcome the great Andrew DeAngelo. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks. It's great to be with Cannabis Lab and you today, Todd. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
No, man, the pleasure is all mine. You know, it's when I joined the cannabis industry a year ago, and I don't want to make this the theme of this podcast that you're Steve's brother, because you're so much more than that. But, you know, Steve was very front and center at a lot of the events that I went to. So I had not discovered you yet. And I told you when I was doing my due diligence for that, I saw an episode, a podcast episode with you and him talking. And when I actually asked Steve about that, he's like, yeah, you know, a lot of people said that maybe we shouldn't keep that up because it got very personal and everything else. And I'm like, Steve, that was my favorite part. It was just such a raw, real conversation about your childhood, and to see where you guys have ended up, I thought it was great insight. I've got to ask you, because with these long form podcasts, right, we tend to start opening up because you don't have that much to talk. Do you guys talk like that often? Like when you get together, are you reminiscing about the past and just the memories and all those experiences that led you to where you are today?
Well, sometimes we do that. My brother and I are pretty obsessed with the present and the future, so we talk about that more often than not. But we do have rituals. We celebrate. Our parents passed in the last 5 years, so we celebrate them every year, and we talk a lot about. We're discussing doing more of the autobiographical storytelling that you liked so much in that podcast. So yes, we are talking about sharing more of that with the world. But yeah, man, when we gather and smoke joints together on the weekends, or over the holidays, or just a little bit more virtually these days, the last year or so, we go deep into the past. We've done a lot together over 35, 40 years, and it's fun to revisit some of those journeys together. It all becomes one thing after a while when you're in a rock and roll band like me and my brother are together, for as long as we've been. It's The music changes, over the decades, and the sound gets tighter, hopefully. I'm sure we have periods where the sound gets a little looser. But our sound's pretty tight these days, and it's been just a marvelous journey. When people refer to me as Steve's brother, it's not something I take offense to at all. It's something I'm very proud of, and certainly I emerging from his shadow is important too. But being Steve's little brother's been a real fun adventure for me.
Yeah, man. I mean, listen, I think you've fully emerged from his shadow with everything that you're involved with, right? All the film projects that you're working on, being a part of Global Go, the reviews that you do on Instagram, they're all great. And I think you've really established yourself. Not that you need to hear that from me, but establish yourself as Andrew DeAngelo, as someone who helped legitimize the business side of this industry, at least to the point that it can be now. So, I certainly appreciate that. It's interesting looking at your story. I always try to find similarities in my past to people in this industry and elsewhere, right? And I find it very intriguing that you were very kind of against cannabis until a certain point in your life, because you're like, I'm gonna be an athlete. I'm gonna be a professional tennis player, professional athlete. And I remember, growing up, I played sports, I played football, and I stayed away from that stuff too, because I didn't know that I'd be a professional athlete, but I'm like, I'm an athlete. I can't do that kind of stuff. And it's interesting now that we're in a point in time when we're starting to hear from the athletes, and they're like, no, we want cannabis. It's so much better. So I get to talk to Ricky Williams pretty often, and he's the biggest advocate of saying, if I was able to use cannabis during my tenure in the NFL, I would have never left and I probably would have played better. Do you find that ironic that it kind of what kept you away from cannabis, we're all trying to infuse that into sports now? It's kind of come full circle.
Well, sure, of course, I was totally wrong as a young kid and an athlete. But I also was influenced a lot by my parents, and my parents were traumatized by my brother raising as much hell as he did when he was young. My brother got locked up, you have to understand, when he was 18 or 19. That was very
Yeah.
traumatizing. My parents, it was traumatizing for me. I was only 9 or 10 years old. I had to go visit him in jail and all that sort of thing. So my perception of my brother, was clouded by all those experiences and our age difference. So, um, but when I did get to hang out with him as a kid, he was always very honest about what he did, and he never hid the fact that he was a weed dealer or a weed consumer. And so I grew up with that. And so when he got locked up, it didn't make any sense to me, because that world he occupied seemed like a good world to me as a child, before he got locked up. I didn't necessarily want to be a part of it, because I was trying to do the sports thing, make my dad happy, a little bit, and just I had certain athletic skills, not great athletic skills, not good enough athletic skills to be a professional athlete. Very few people are blessed with that kind of athletic skill and discipline and training, all the things you need to come together for to be a professional athlete. But I had enough that I wanted to play around with being an athlete in high school and see what I could do with my body in space. So, and I really enjoyed just the game itself. My sport was tennis, and I just enjoyed running around whacking that ball as hard as I could. And you sort of get in this zone when you play tennis, and when you're at an equal level with somebody, or maybe they're a little better than you, and you can get in this very strange and wonderful zone with that person when you're playing with them, like you can with a lot of sports, right? I mean, team sports, you get in the zone as a team, and you learn how to move together as a team, and the more you do that, the more you win, the more successful you are. Even if the individuals on the team may not have tremendous talent alone, but together they may be quite great. So and you get into these. That's one of the things that cannabis taught me. One of the things that was familiar with cannabis for me coming out of sports, because I was hurt and my brother's trying to give me some pain relief with that first joint I decided to take with him. But you know, it gave me, it was familiar in the sense that it put me in a zone, you know, put me in that
Yeah.
stoned, intoxicated zone of euphoria and hope and inspiration and just being blown away by the life force and nature and all those things that happen when you get turned on to cannabis, and maybe when you're a teenager, and those things are even more profound. At least they were for me. So that was familiar. And then later when I studied theater arts and storytelling, that's a whole nother zone you get into, right? As a storyteller.
So let me interrupt you there, right? So that's something that I'm very intrigued with as well too, because being an athlete, you know, especially in high school, the stereotypes we see in teen movies are not completely inaccurate, right? So it's maybe today it's a little bit different, but I know when I went to school, when you went to school, you know, if you played sports, you were a jock, and the jocks typically weren't in the drama department, which is funny because again, look for those similarities. I was an artist. I love to draw. I love to create. I still love to do storytelling, which is why I ended up doing this show. So I was a rarity in the athletic world. Were you always do you always have that creative arts mentality, even though you were an athlete? Because again, that is a rare combination of person that has both of those interests and it continues to pursue both, you know, into high school and maybe beyond if you didn't get injured. So was that part of your personality? Or let me ask this, did cannabis kind of open that up for you and make you realize like I love this stuff, I should focus on it?
Well, it's a really interesting, my creative journey is really interesting, and it's all of those things. So my mom was a creative, very creative person. She studied journalism when I was a little kid. She went back to school after my parents split up, and she studied journalism and became a professional writer and copy editor for a while. So I was influenced by her. I also went to a Waldorf school for the first few years of my elementary school. I went to a Rudolf Steiner Waldorf private school, and that school is centered around the arts and foreign languages. Unfortunately, I got yanked out of that school when my parents split up, and they couldn't decide who was going to pay the tuition. That, you know, divorce kind of kills things like private education, but that kind of planted this creative seed in me, you know. And then I was an athlete, and I was sort of making my dad happy, and I turned away from creativity. And then when I smoked that joint with my brother, it all came crashing back and bloomed again. And I enrolled in my first drama class in high school shortly after that. And started exploring that side of myself again. So the cannabis, I had sort of creative bug planted in me when I was young, and then the cannabis sort of gave it the water and nutrients it needed to bloom. And to this day, you know, that's where I'm sure you're the same way. I mean, our creative work is really important to us. Is where we have the most fun and the most passion, even though we lose a lot of money on it.
Yeah, man. It's interesting. You know, for me, what cannabis did is it got me out of my own head where it was you can put stuff out there that you're not, you know, it's interesting. A lot of people say they're perfectionists, but really they're just afraid of other people judging their work, right? And putting it out there for people to judge. And I think that's where cannabis really sparked the creative in me, where it was, you know, someone had asked me to do something like this a long time ago when I was, you know, about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. It was on a different topic. It was on technology. That's where I was working at the time. Probably been a lot more boring, but it was when I got into cannabis and, started thinking about it, where it's like, hey, there are a lot of people who do this that I don't think are that good, and they're confident and they're putting it out there and they're successful. So why not just put it out there and see what happens? So it's interesting how it unlocks that part of your brain and almost gives you a confidence where it's like, no, I'm going to put it out there just like everybody else. And if it sucks, then I know I shouldn't be doing it. But if it gets a reception, or even if it sucks, that just sucked. And the next one I'm going to do is not bad. So it's interesting how it unlocks that and helps you be more creative and realize that you can create stuff, and some's going to be amazing and some's going to be a little bit lackluster. But as long as you're doing what you love, you're eventually going to get to that great stuff. For me, as an outsider looking at your life, and again, that's just with the media available to me, I feel like once you started to get involved in the cannabis world, and I'm going to use your terminology where you say you and Steve were trading cannabis, right? It kind of allowed you to explore yourself, because you didn't. I don't want to skirt this, because I don't want to sound negative. You didn't have to get what would say a traditional job where you had to go to a place and work. So I feel like you were able to explore your creativity. Being a cannabis trader, you have to get creative in the way that you do business as well too. So I feel like in reality, that was truly a benefit to you, because you kind of got to explore who you were as a person before you figured out what you wanted to do. Would you say that kind of helped your journey that way?
In the long run, yes. But the problem was in the 1980s and 90s when I was coming up as a young creative. If you were loud and proud about being a weed trader and a weed activist, it hurt your ability to earn a living as a creative. The stigma was just pretty profound, especially in a small niche kind of creative place like the American Theater, or maybe I did a lot of independent film. There was a big independent film movement in the late 80s and the early 90s, the whole DIY. That's when Sundance started and all those film festivals started. And so I was a little bit part of those early creative efforts on the DIY film scene. And it was really hard to break through to paid gigs because I guess people who, were paying creatives to make more mainstream material were afraid that they would be stoned all the time, or they wouldn't show up, or whatever the stigma was, whatever the lie was they believed. They didn't know they were believing a lie, perhaps, or maybe they did, but I knew they were believing a lie, and I'm like, come on. So actually, the cannabis trail ended up being a place I could make much better living and be myself more. And then you're right that then I was able to find my own path. That's the road less traveled, not so much the mainstream world, and get the creativity out there. We're still beating on the mainstream door
Yeah.
to get our content made. And we'll see if we ever get through that. But in any case, it's like you said, the journey is more important than the destination, and it's just part of who I am, what I'm about, and why it matters. We have to change people from the inside out, and we have to move people in their hearts. That's how we're going to. That's really the way we're going to spread cannabis all over the world. So storytelling is a really great way to do that, and of course the cannabis itself is a great way to do that too, right?
Yeah. I feel like they definitely go hand in hand, cannabis and storytelling. One certainly complements the other. Um, what interests me a lot is you and your brother kind of stayed a path and ended up, and I'll give you guys some of this credit. I know there were more than just you two, but you really kind of started changing the world, and especially, starting with this country, right? But looking back, and I've heard you do a ton of interviews saying that your parents were worried about you following in Steve's footprints, or him influencing you, right? And especially back then, because you're so far away from where we are today, that you have the stigma, you have everything else. Obviously, they're worried about both their sons ending up in jail, when now we can look at it and see it, now that you guys have accomplished what you've accomplished and we see where we are today, that you really did start changing the world and the world's view on cannabis. You guys very much participated in that. So, I'm interested to know, and I hope I'm not getting too personal here, the conversations that you would have with your mom and dad, more recently before they had passed, about your journey and about what you guys were doing, when it's, hey, and maybe you laugh about it, maybe you don't, but it's like, you guys were worried about us going to jail. And here we are, we're pioneers in an industry where being, given lifetime achievement awards and everything else. And you guys have inspired, I would say, an entire another generation to think that cannabis is okay. And not only is okay, that it's appropriate. Right. And I think you guys did you're very much at the center of that, at least from a media standpoint. And that's very important, because that's who we're seeing and that's who we're believing. And, you guys inspire people like me to do things like this, to hopefully inspire more people. So when you look back on it, you went down a very hard path, but it ended up being the right one. So, I'm interested to see what the family's take on that was on, more recently.
Well, probably the accomplishment I'm most proud of is the journey that my family took, because we had my parents are we had a brother in between me and Steve, named Daniel, and he died when I was an infant. And Steve was just 11 years old, 12 years old, and that devastated my family. And a couple years later, my parents split. So that was another really hard thing. And then my brother got into weed and a revolution and ran away from home. Well, didn't really run away from home, but left home. And that was another traumatic blow to my family. So, and my parents were legitimately afraid we were going to go to jail for the rest of our lives for a long, long period of time. And they already had a son die. And so to think that, so of course they were against Steve being in the weed business and me later, and we're not happy with it. But it was also a complicated relationship because my mom, we had to help support my mom, and we did that with weed after the divorce. That's how, and my brother did that first, and then we did it together, and that's just a fact. So she had a very complex relationship with it all because she had to survive from this trade that we were my brother and then we were both in, but she also had to try to protect us from going to prison and voice her opposition to it. And she would always say things like, you could do whatever you want. You can make this money that you're making and giving me any way you want. You're so smart. Why are you doing this? Why are you risking everything like this? And so we would have these long discussions and arguments, and sometimes voices would be raised, and fights would occur, verbal fights, of course, and we'd have disagreements, and with my father was even more adamant. Again, he knew what we were doing. Eventually we were so successful we had to confess to him, see if he could help us deal with all the cash we had at one point. But my dad never did. He was adamantly trying to be a good dad. In his eyes,
Yeah.
being a good dad meant you said no. You didn't encourage it. You were against. And later in life, both my parents, after we got out of our teens and out of our 20s, and we were able to legalize medical, and we were able to open up a legal business, then my parents, and they got older and they got their own aches and pains on their own health struggles. And, we had this medicine. So by the end of my parents' life, the last 5 or 10 years of their lives, both of them were taking cannabis medicine, and were fully, they actually financed Harborside opening. We sold my mom's house. After my brother got busted, we lost everything. My parents, we went through this whole trauma, and our Hail Mary was Harborside, and we sold my mom's house. We took the money from the house. We opened up Harborside. We borrowed more money from my dad. He was okay with it because it was a legal business, although he charged us a hefty percentage. uh, and And so, they helped finance it by that point, and so this whole arc happened where, we began in this very dark, prohibited place of conflict and strife, and my brother sort of pioneering all this, and then me coming on board, and the voice of the two brothers together, the band was, a lot stronger. And, we were able to legalize weed with a whole bunch, like you said, a whole community of people, a whole village of people, many, 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 many people, too many people to name here. But, and, our family, even though my parents never came back together again, everybody was at peace. And we said everything we need to say to each other, and we loved each other. My parents never really forgave each other, unfortunately, but everybody else did. And, both of our parents died at home in our arms, so it could have turned out so much worse than that. And I personally did a lot of work to glue that all back together as a kid. That was one of my roles in the family, was sort of glue it all back together and teach everybody how to cooperate again. And so to this day, it really, everything I've achieved, that is probably the greatest and most important achievement, right? Is your own family being at peace with itself.
Yeah, man. I mean, just the short conversation we've already had today. And again, I'm no therapist or anything else. I'm married to one. Trust me, I hear it all the time. But you know, just talking about growing up and making your mom happy and making your dad happy and loving your brother and idolizing him. And it sounds like that was almost a secondary, which became the primary lifelong journey of yours, is to pull the family back together, because you guys went again, I know what I know from the media, but it sounds like you went through some really rough times that not a lot of families go through. And, it was a journey that ultimately ended up paying off for you and Steve. And I'm glad that you were able to kind of complete that initiative that you had to bring everybody together while, you got to build, I won't call it an empire yet, but you guys built a legal industry on your backs with your brother of all people. So I imagine, that's got to feel great. And then the fact that the family was able to make peace before, while everyone was still here, I'm sure that just really completes it for you.
Oh yeah, my parents got to see a good portion of that success. So, I'll never forget. My father came up to my parents came to New York when we did our media tour for Weed Wars, which was the first reality TV show about a cannabis company, legal cannabis company. And we did the Bill O'Reilly show, and we did the Dylan Radigan show, and we're doing all this giant media, and my dad came up, and he's so proud, and he's in the green room, we're bringing him he's coming with us, and he's sitting in the green room. He's like, God, this is big time, guys. You guys, this is big time. And he kept saying that over and over. And it just felt really good to be there with him and share that with him and be able to have him there with us when we did that.
That's
And,
cool.
super
I give
special.
you credit. I probably would have started just taking little jabs here and there. Dad, this is incredible. Not bad for a couple of weed dealers, huh, Dad?
Oh no, we did, of course we did. And we're a bunch of Italians, so we have lively discussions and lots of humor and jokes, and we like to give each other a hard time. But he was there. He was there. How many, with all this terrible war that's happened in our country over this
Yeah.
plant, he was, and my dad, he grew up in the Depression. He got drafted in the Korean War. He went into work for the government. He was about the system, man. He wasn't about rebellion. He was about the system. All right. He was
Yeah.
about being an American. He was a first generation. He grew up in the Depression. He grew up poor. The Salvation Army had to come to his house during Christmas time. That's how my dad grew up. So he was all about the system, and
Yeah.
and yet when we're legalizing weed and doing this media tour, he's not only there for us, he's giving us advice. I mean, building Harvard, my dad was a great businessman, entrepreneur, and very accomplished. He's taught us how to do all that, and he gave us our most important advice. And really, without my dad, all next to us during those first decade of Harborside, we would not have been able to make as good a decisions as we did.
It must have been so much fun just having your family close to you while you're doing this and going on this journey. And I'd circle back to what I said before about you inspiring a new generation of people. When I read your goals with Harborside, right? Part of the reason why I personally got my medical card here in Florida was to be able to buy it and I say this like a human being, to walk into a store, to have an actual transaction, for it to be a store with people who want to help you. I've got some crazy stories of buying on the black and gray markets, and I don't need to get into those. I've probably told them a few times here, but they weren't comfortable, they weren't fun. And something about the experience of going into a just having it in a store, and then with you and Steve taking it further with Harborside, that you wanted a true point of sale system, you wanted barcodes on the products. I really look back at it and feel like you guys kind of set the standard for what a dispensary needs to be, and realize that this industry is just like anything else. This is a retail store. Just any other retailer you would go into, we want you to have the same experience, but we're going to educate you on something that may change your life. How important was that customer experience? I mean, is that the whole intention with Harborside? Is we're going to bring a legitimate customer experience to the cannabis industry, and that is how we're going to mainstream cannabis. I imagine that had to be the thought.
That was the genius of my brother, really, that of his vision, and not just the vision for the retail store, but the strategy at that time. At that time, California was the only legal medical state. The city of Oakland was the only place that in California that had a licensing program. So it was important that we do a good job. It was really important we did a good job so that other places could follow the example of Oakland and license in California and then other places. So it was the intention, Steve's intention from the beginning, that we were going to do that with creating a I don't want to say mainstream retail experience, because it wasn't a mainstream retail experience. It was more of a nonprofit community cannabis center than it was, a traditional retail experience. But we wanted the look and feel and form to act like a traditional retail experience. And then you would have all these different zones. I like that word zone. Zones where you could do different things within the complex, the Harborside complex. You could write a letter to a prisoner. You could get, you could take a yoga class. You could take
Oh, wow.
you could take a free cultivation, how to grow your own medicine class. You could get free weed if you were poor, and showed us that you were under public assistance. So it was more of a community center, and so that's what we wanted to create. And now to this day, even with the adult use and cannabis getting a little bit more transactional, I guess you could say, but a lot of the things we pioneered are now part of just about every dispensary you go into. The way
Yeah.
it's laid out, the way the displays work, the way the counters work, the way the flow works, is very much modeled off of what we just had to learn. We just had to discover and learn. And we weren't retail people.
Yeah.
And so we had to kind of figure it out. And I think a lot of people probably have taken it to another level now, in the industry, who are retail people.
It,
And so, but yeah, that's exactly that was exactly the intention.
So I want to go back to you guys getting started at Harborside. I know that the parents were involved, you and Steve, and so you have this creative background. You're trading cannabis. How much business experience did you have leading into this? Because I know that you were responsible for the day-to-day operations. So not only does Andrew the entrepreneur have the toughest, the challenging job of starting, running, and operating a business, but now you're also doing a legal cannabis business. where the model does not exist. Just like you said, everything that you were doing was trial and error, to the biggest point. You had no models before, except for some of the things you might have been doing in the gray market, maybe some past job experience to bring in, but there was no set model. So, I'm curious to know any business experience that you had leading up to it that you could apply, and really what that was like for you, just that trial and error of like, we've got to make this work. Because to me, when I read the interviews, it seemed like you tried something that didn't work, you tried something else and that worked. That was the way that it was. And and I love that pursuit as an entrepreneur, because I think so many people, and I want to promote the entrepreneur side of you, I think so many people are afraid of that failure, that they don't realize that that's also part of learning, right? So to hear it from someone like you, then we sit back and see the accomplishments you made. I love hearing those early on where it's like, I started in this, I didn't know what we were doing, so we tried this and we tried that. I'd love to kind of hear your start at Harborside, and the experiences that you had.
Yeah, well, we were underground weed dealers, and we were big wholesalers at one time, where we were selling literally a couple £1,000 a month.
Wow.
So that's a lot. And
Yeah.
so that you learn a lot about business doing that, and you also learn a lot about how to hide from the world so you don't get caught doing it. And so that's where I got my business chops, and I learned a lot from my brother and my father. They were both entrepreneurs, so it was kind of in my blood. And then the creative chops is what taught me how to iterate, and how, or experiment. And how to be with teams. Doing a live theater is very collaborative, and you have to build a lot of trust with people, and everybody has to play their role, and do it well, and it all has to synchronize. And that training really helped, because a retail cannabis experience is not too different. Every day is a performance. Every day is interacting with the audience, or the customer, or the patients in this case, in the early days of Harborside, and figuring things out. I mean, every time you do a production of Hamlet, yes, a whole bunch of productions of Hamlet have been done before, but you still have to figure out how to do Hamlet, and it's a really hard thing to figure out. So that having to figure out things over and over again was good training for me, to be in this environment where, oh, okay, we have to figure this out. So the combination, it was just a really good combination, and I've always, at least up until the last 5 or 10 years, the main role I played in the band was sort of the rhythm guitar, and the manager. So I kept the trains running on time. Steve figured out how to build the better train, and so that was often how the dynamic worked, with us, as would be typical with our family story, and just the older, younger brother dynamic, and many family businesses that are run by brothers. It's often one brother's a really good manager, the other brother's a really good visionary, and then the manager, it sort of develops their own ability to be the visionary, and visionaries develop their own sort of managerial skills too, and you end up meeting in the middle at some points in your career together, and so that's what we did. But yeah, those early days, we did have one model, nonprofit, sort of activist driven model, the Berkeley Patients Group, which I'm proud to say is still around. They're actually the oldest continually operating dispensary, I think, is the Berkeley Patients Group. But they were a little bit of a model for us. They were run a lot differently than we ended up. Our vision ended up being a lot different than theirs. But they did teach us a few things that we were able to build on. So we're all standing on the shoulders of somebody else. Berkeley Patients Group was standing on the shoulders of Dennis Perone and the early pioneers of the medical program in California and San Francisco, and Dennis was standing on the shoulders of people that came before him, So, and that, as you know, that's just how it works, and
Yeah.
it's something to cultivate and be proud of. We all should work as hard as we can to make our shoulders strong, so the future generations can stand upon them. You know?
Dude, I love that story, and I mean, just watching your journey through Harborside, and I think it was what in the last year or two you decided that it was time for some new adventures, and like you just said, eventually the manager has the ability to become the visionary. And I look at the projects that you're doing now, and you certainly are a visionary at this point. Between the columns that you do for Playboy, that like I said, just the little short videos that you put on your Instagram, the things you're doing for Last Prisoner Project. I know that you've got independent film projects in the works. And, as much as that is the creative aspect of you, there's also the businessman behind making sure all that gets done and financed and everything else. You know, a- Going from Harborside now, do you truly feel that cannabis has given you the ability to now completely control your journey in life, that you really get to explore your passions and combine them all into these projects? I mean, you've got so much stuff going on right now.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about the stage of my career I'm in now, is I can bring all these things together. When you run one company for as long as I did, now I'm a consultant and strategic advisor to the global cannabis industry. That's how I keep the lights on for the creative project and the Last Prisoner Project, as you mentioned a moment ago, a nonprofit I started a couple years ago with Steve and others.
Mhm.
It's fun to be able to build the industry now, and take all the lessons we learned. We took Harborside public for lots of different reasons, and that was when I thought it was time to exit, because I don't know how to run public companies, and I thought,
I I would have done the exact same thing, so I
yeah.
think it was a smart move.
And generally, the investment bankers and the people who put up the $60 million to take us public, wanted that too. So, and unfortunately, that exit didn't turn out so good. We're still kind of crawling our way out of it, like everybody in the public markets the last couple of years. It's coming back now for everybody.
Mhm.
So, and Harborside's included in that, and we just raised another, I don't know, 30 some million to grow. So I'm very optimistic about Harborside's future, but I'm just a shareholder now. I'm not part of the day to day at all, and now I'm doing strategic advising and helping other people build their cannabis companies, and organizations, not just companies, but organizations. And doing a lot of work on the social equity and legacy side too, and what's I call ESG, which is a sort of a equity and sustainability governance, movement that Steve and I are. We have a big, our industry is going international, and just the packaging waste right now is out of control, and we need to do a better job with all that sort of thing. So, working on that too. So yeah, people can reach me at andrewdeangelo.com. They can reach Last Prisoner Project at lastprisonerproject.org. And you can keep up with me or reach out to me. I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn and all the
Yeah,
rest
man.
of the platforms. But and I really my life story lends itself to helping people, and kind of helping folks solve difficult things, and figure things out in real time, which sort of all of us are doing in this industry still. I mean, there's some models now that we can grab a hold of, but there's also a lot of bad public policy and just constraints all over the place that we all have to navigate and manage, either on our own or together. And it's so I like to help people do that.
It's crazy to me because I watched a lot of interviews with you for this show, and you hear Steve talk, and he's very high level, very macro, and then I hear you, and you can go so deep on so many different topics, whether it's social equity, whether it's licensing, whether it's the legislation around all these different propositions, whether it's the thought of federal legalization, what's going on in Mexico. I mean, so many different topics, and you're just getting so granular. I mean, you were a business leader, you're a thought leader. Who would have thought that the two brothers selling weed way back in the day would be icons, right? And I know that you're part of Global Go, and I know you're involved with Paul Rosen there, which God, I would kill to be a fly on the wall in the conversation between the two of you guys. Would be incredible. It's got to be a really cool feeling consulting globally for cannabis companies where you get to see where people have taken what you started, right? So, like you said, you start to see a lot of what you did at Harborside implemented across the industry. It's got to be really cool to, and I heard you say you get to pick which companies you work for to really kind of cherry pick the really cool ones that you like, where you can add value and just see how far they've come. Would you say, obviously, I know it's a different experience. Harborside was your baby, your family was involved, but this has got to be a really cool experience, kind of realizing the fruits of your labor and then helping people take it even further.
Yes, well, I'm glad you mentioned Global Go and Paul Rosen. It's a terrific group. I'm proud to be a part of them. That's the group I work with when we take things global, or when people are trying to get into the industry and figure out their spot and their licensing. I don't write applications for licenses, but Global Go is really, really good at that. And then I'm affiliated with another group called Cannabis, which does a similar thing on the ESG side, on the sustainability side. So it is a great feeling to, after all this time of being an operational person, you're able to elevate after years and years and years of perfecting operations, especially if you have partners like my brother Steve that also are mentoring and teaching and developing themselves and you along the way. You get to a point where you can go, all right, now I people like Paul Rosen are reaching out and asking me to help them help others. And so that felt really good to get that invite from Paul, of course, and just to have people recognize that all the scars on my back are valuable things for them to tap into and to learn from. It is a really uplifting feeling after so many years of being sort of in a much different place with the stigma and sort of having to emerge from all of that. So it's a really satisfying feeling. I'm really thrilled to be in this stage of my career. I'm still a relatively young man, so it's going to be the next few decades of my career I'm really looking forward to, because it's sort of prime time for me.
I'm looking forward to it too, and I'll tell you exactly why. Is you went through Harborside. You could easily, especially with your credentials in this industry, just be a consultant, focus on business, live a little bit more of a relaxed life. But you've made it a mission to make this industry better and make it better for the people who it needs to be better for. Between Last Prisoner Project, between the ESG stuff that you're doing, we actually had Richard DeLisi at the last Cannabis Lab conference down here in Florida. So you guys did great work with him, and we got to meet him. I didn't get to go. I had COVID. God forbid I would have given it to him. So I stayed home, but everybody else in C Lab got to meet him and do the meet and greet, and that was great. But now, I look on your Instagram and you're promoting minority owned and Black owned businesses, really showcasing their products, those dispensaries. I mean, you don't need to do that. You don't have to, but you're doing it because you love this industry and you're trying to make it correct. That's why I see it so important that you're still around. In any other industry, you would probably just be a regular consultant. Hey, I did my time. I built my company. You guys are all going to, and I don't mean this in a negative way, pay me a lot of money to hear what I have to say. But you say, okay, yes, I will be a consultant so I can keep the lights on, but I'm going to make sure that this industry is going to continue to advance. I got to imagine that's just the passion for the plant and the people who support it that drives you to do that, because that's what we see. And it's incredible. I love the brands that you're promoting. So,
Well, yeah, when you learn when you grew up like we did, you learn to celebrate your own community, and I want, there's people that have worked with this plant for a long time, legacy people like me and Steve, people of color, black folks. I did a lot of those videos during Black History Month to showcase those businesses. I showcase those brands all the time in my videos. I think it's really important that people need to know how to support these businesses, and I view that I'm just trying to celebrate and build trust, and the notion is someday can we put all this together and present to consumers some kind of cannabis supply chain that includes these communities, and that we can proudly say is carbon free, neutral and sustainable. Can we build that, and can we present that, and can we maybe get corporate cannabis to help us with that, and maybe build a new kind of industry, not just a new industry, because building a new industry, go out to Silicon Valley, you can do that, there's so many things you can do, right, to build new industries and make money. But to build a new kind of industry is another matter altogether. And when you grow up in the shadows like I did, you have to learn how to get joy from something other than transactions, because your
Yeah.
transactions are hidden. You don't get to celebrate your transactions. You don't get to buy a fancy car or a fancy house, because you get busted if you buy one of those. That's how I avoided getting busted. I didn't buy stuff like that. So you learn how to get joy from other things, like helping others, and like celebrating your community, and like legalizing weed, and like and once you learn how to get joy and meaning in your life from those things, what you find is that there's actually more joy and meaning in those things than there is in the transactional things. And it's one of the things the plant taught me when I was really, really young, and first started smoking weed. It wasn't just about, it opened my eyes up to all these different things that could be, and all these different possibilities that could be, not just playing sports, and not just doing transactions. Even though one of the first things I did was sell weed, yeah, but it wasn't the person handed me the money that got me off on selling weed. What got me off on selling weed was what happened to that person when they got the weed.
Yeah.
And that's what got me off on being a weed trader, was not, oh, I made this money. It was, wow, look what happened to you, and look at how happy you are and grateful you are. And there's this thing happening between us that's quite different than just a transaction. So that was the thing that got me into it in the first place. And I think that's what one of the things the plant does, and it's one of the things our world needs to do, is transactions are important, but they can't be the be end of everything, be all and end all of everything. And right
Yeah.
now, just they are. And it's just, we're all working so hard, and it's just, and the world's not, is suffering more and more, and the more people work hard and engage in more and more transactions. And it's like this never ending spiral. And
Yeah.
so hopefully we're going to flood all of that with plant medicine, and change the paradigm.
No, man, I think you're right. I think the internet kind of took the human element out of a lot of the transaction that we have, and it made everything so high speed and so fast. And when you look at just the essence of cannabis, when you're enjoying it with someone, you're together, you're sharing it, you're slowing down, you're taking a moment to stop and smell the roses. And it's, listen, the internet's been great. It's been a great tool for everybody, for business, for the world, access to information. It's done some bad things too, but I think and I'll steal this statement from Rogan where he talks about processed information like processed food. I think we do need to take a step back and smell the roses and take some time to enjoy life. And I certainly think, and the pandemic has proved it, that cannabis fuels that, right? And with all the bad things that happened in the pandemic, I hope that it's given people enough time to reflect on their lives and what's important to them, and to take a step back. And I think we've seen that with just the attention that our industry has gotten. I don't know if you have any input on that.
Well, I hope you're right. I mean, slowing down is super critical for all of us to do. I'm pretty aware human being. I'm pretty strung out on this thing. Um, uh, uh, you know, um,
Advice to slow down coming from someone who has like 19 projects going
I
on
know
right now.
exactly right. We teach what we need to learn in this strange way, right? And so, yeah, one of the things I need to learn is to slow down. And one of the things I try to talk about is slowing down, to get through my own thick head as much as the listeners' thick heads. We all have thick heads when it comes to this stuff. We're all strung out on the information feed. We all have the supercomputer behind us that knows everything about us and is predicting what we're doing next. And so, you know, plants medicine like cannabis can, I take breaks throughout the day. I try to slow down throughout the day. I try to, maybe I smoke a little cannabis, maybe I just go out and sit in the sun, or maybe I take a meditation app. Talk about
Yeah.
being strung out on the phone. I'll take a meditation app and do a guided meditation, but it is something I do try to practice, despite the fact that in many instances I'm not quite that good at it yet, because my FOMO is greater than my slowing down. My fear of missing out is greater than my passion for slowing down, I guess.
Well, I mean, you get to do a lot of the things you love. So, if you love filmmaking and everything else, it's not a terrible thing. It shouldn't be too taxing. I know it's still quote unquote work, but you were a man who was able to follow his passion and make a career out of that. And I think that's a model for anyone to really follow. Andrew, we've been talking for almost an hour now. I've really focused on your past, and it's hard not to, because you've done so much. I'd probably need to have you back, not for another episode, but for like 3 or 4, just because there's so much that you do, man. But give us a look, or at least an opinion on some of the things you think might happen this year, and anything that might excite you on the horizon. I know you're working very hard on social equity projects, obviously still working hard on the Last Prisoner project. You've got the films, but just as an industry as a whole, a lot of people with the Democratic government in place thought that we might get to federal legalization faster. I didn't. I didn't, and it scares me because we see how all these individual programs have been set up. You're still someone who's trying to make them better. I won't say perfect them, because perfection I don't know is achievable. So when we look at the federal government and the people who created the DMV, and the people who are very reactive to everything, and I'll say the negative stuff, you don't have to. Do you think that we will see any kind of legislative improvements this year? Do you think that our industry is going to get any kind of leg up? What can you expect from 2021?
Will it happen this year or right before the midterms in 2022? I think we get Safe Banking Act before the midterms. I don't think we get much more than that at the
Yeah.
federal level. And maybe, like you said, that might just be fine, because the frameworks in all the states are pretty bad. And if the federal government follows the frameworks that the states have done, that'll be bad. And it'll be
Yeah.
really hard to change the federal framework. It is extremely hard to change the state frameworks. It could take generations
Yeah.
to change the federal framework. So it's important to get it right the first time, or largely right, at least 80% right. We're going to follow the 80-20 rule. I hope it's 80% right, not 20% right. So
Yeah.
right now it's in California, we're maybe 20% right, maybe we're 80% wrong. So, but I do think we get safe banking. I think the Democrats, will get that done. But it won't be easy because they have to survive the filibuster on that one. They're not going to be able to do that one with just a simple majority. Same thing with the MORE Act. So they're going to have to get 60 votes in the Senate. That's just going to be very hard to do on the MORE Act. Don't see it happening. I do see it happening in banking because it has a more bipartisan support, and there's this other constituency called the banks.
Yeah. Definitely want to see that,
Yeah.
Hey, but what if it works in our favor and it gives our industry access to institutional capital and everything else, or just a proper bank account without predatory rates? I think that's definitely a good thing. As much as we don't want the banks really profiting off the back of
Oh,
the
sure we
work.
do. Sure we do, man. Let them profit off of us. There's plenty of room for everybody. The banks got
I
to.
like that.
Yeah, the banks got to be banks. So that's fine. But my point was, the politicians in the Senate listen to banks a lot more than they listen to cannabis people.
Yeah, man.
So I think we get that one done. Whereas the MORE Act, we don't have a powerful constituency other than a bunch of activists and the industry itself pushing for it. But we don't have another powerful constituent ally there. We're starting to gather them. Labor unions are one, and I hope environmental organizations are another, and social justice, social equity, all these groups. But that coming together is still very much a work in progress.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. I hope you're right. I would love to see the Safe Banking Act pass. Like I said before, listen, folks, I do want federal legalization. I want it done right. And it's the government is not known for that. The states have not figured it out yet. So let's protect the individual markets. Let's figure out a model that works, and then let's bring that to the federal government. As much as it might delay the instant gratification we're all looking for, I think it'll be done right. And obviously, like something you're working on right now, there should be very much a social equity component of it. So,
Well, there is in the MORE Act. But
okay.
the MORE Act is just, it's going to be hard to get 60 votes, man. I don't know
Yeah.
how you get 60 votes on that. It's going to be a war to get 60 votes for the banking. But I think the banks will get us 10 Republican votes. Cause they will, but
Yeah.
but they might not. I mean, it could also, you're right. It could also fail. The Democrats have some big priorities that they're trying to tackle right now, and cannabis just is not, I wouldn't say is in the top 3 or 5.
Yeah. No,
For them,
but
us, it's number 1. Of course, for us, it's number 1, but for them, it's different.
now, I would honestly just love to see, and I don't know exactly what does this, whether it's descheduling or anything else like that. Just the ability for universities and other scientific entities to do true research, like Israel has done in this country. So you can literally, instead of us making, and I don't want to call them hypothetical arguments because they're very far from hypothetical, but when we can't have that official university research or anything else that has that dumb stamp of approval on it to say, no, this is right, and it's funny. I think maybe I was talking to Steve actually, where when I want to say over in July in the pandemic, there's a study about CBD helping decrease the side effects or the
The
symptoms
entry
of
point.
COVID.
Yeah, the
You
entry
know,
point. The entry point in the lungs. Yes, the
Yeah.
CBD protects from that. So
And I remember when I first read that article, my first thought, being in the industry, being an advocate, being a fan, was that's got to be bullshit. And then I see another article and I'm like, oh my God. And then I remember seeing an article today where they're actually doing trials over in Israel on giving COVID patients actual CBD tincture, and they're seeing great
oh, really? I
results.
didn't know
And
about after they get COVID. Okay, interesting.
yeah,
The study in Canada indicated a preventative, if that CBD was preventative and would help you prevent you from getting it. How many hardcore cannabis people? Well, you got it.
yeah,
So so you're one of the few hardcore cannabis people I know that got it.
maybe I'm not that hardcore. No, I, no,
You take
honestly, the
you
funny
consume cannabis, right? CBD and other cannabinoids.
every day. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you're one of the first people I know who's a regular consumer that got COVID. So
So the funny story about that is I'd probably say my symptom, I was one of the few, I wouldn't say completely asymptomatic, but mostly asymptomatic. I was
hmm
just a little tired for about 3 days or so. Honestly, if somebody that I knew didn't say they tested positive, I would have never even went for the test and not known I had it. So, but
I
because of that study, I went down to the dispensary and they had a 1-to-1 gummy. And I'm like, well, it's got CBD in it and I shouldn't be sparking it right now. So I got the 1-to-1 gummies and they were great. So I called that my COVID medication.
all right, yeah. I mean, interesting, interesting.
I'm not recommending it as a doctor because I'm clearly not a medical professional.
No,
I'm a
neither
podcaster,
not. I
folks,
mean,
but
we're not. Of course not. There's one study that we're
yeah,
referencing, but there's the Israelis in particular have done a lot. This plant's been studied. The
yeah,
problem is American science, for some reason, doesn't like to accept studies from other countries. I don't know
yeah,
why.
man.
There's sort of a nationalism to not just America. I think a lot of countries have that nationalism with science. And yeah, I agree with you. I would love to unleash American researchers on cannabis. They're eager to do it, and even more and more of it's happening now. They're all just going through the DEA red tape and somehow getting it done.
Yeah,
Um, and it takes years and years and years and years, and you gotta get the weed from that terrible place in University of Mississippi, but that the feds grow. That's it has like 3% THC in it.
yeah,
It's like the worst dirt weed you've ever smoked. And that's what they provide to do the research. And so it's like, they're opening that up slowly but surely a little bit, and I'd love to see that happen too, man. It would really accelerate cannabinoid research because America spends more money on that sort of thing than most other countries do.
that's awesome, man. Well, I've hijacked over an hour of your time, Andrew. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I've got to say, man, the conversation with Steve, the conversation with you, you guys are so great, so humble, especially for how much you guys have accomplished. It's been a pleasure. I wish we got to do this in person because I'd love to shake your hand and say hi, especially now that I'm safe. But yeah, man, we've got to do this again when I can get out to California or a conference or something. I'd love to sit down and talk to you again.
Me too. I can't wait to be with everybody again. So thank you for having me virtually on the show, and it was a great conversation, Todd. And I'm looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely, man. I know you did a little plug in the middle there, but before we let you go, let's get all the plugs out there, where we can find you, where people can watch those videos, and then I'll let you sign off.
All right. Well, all my social media is Andrew_DeAngelo. So that's IG and Twitter. AndrewDeangelo.com is my personal website. You can email me there. And then LinkedIn is just Andrew DeAngelo. So lastprisonerproject.org. If you're interested in Harborside, shop harborside.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you, everybody at home. It's been a pleasure. If you missed any part of this episode, it'll be live on our YouTube page on Monday at youtube.com/elevate your grind. For all the great things that are coming up with Cannabis Lab, go to joinclab.com. You should definitely become a member. Come to our events. They're a great time. You're going to meet great like-minded people. Maybe we'll even get Andrew to an event in the future, folks. It's been a pleasure. We will be live again here tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern, right here at facebook.com/Cannabusiness Group. See you tomorrow, everyone. Bye.